Joining our series this morning is Andrew Myer, AM, Principal of the AV Myer Group and of course a board member of the Myer family company. Andrew, I thought we'd open our discussion with Victoria, the state of Victoria, particularly over the course of the past 2 years. You're obviously a member of the Myer family, a very proud Victorian family. What do you make of the events of the past 2 years, and how long do you think it'll be before Victoria recovers to the great state it once was?
Good morning, Rob. Thanks for having me on your program. Look, it's been, as every viewer would know, a very, very challenging 18 months for Victoria particularly. I've been fortunate. I've been out of the state for almost half of that time, so I can't speak with deep experience, but certainly observationally from friends and feedback, it's been very tough. And the government and the citizens face huge challenges in the next 5 to 10 years. I think confidence has been really knocked around and certain sectors have been completely smashed, and that's true. However, you've got to look to the future. That's all we've got, and we will get through it. We've been there before, 1890s, we got through that, 1930s, got through that. So we're a pretty tenacious bunch. So I'm optimistic, but I'm a realist as well.
And then in terms of the broader Australia outlook, how would you evaluate the leadership that we've seen both from a federal level and a state level as well?
Look, sticking with the positive themes, I think the federal government, despite the slow start, the vaccine and the vaccination program has really delivered. I don't think there's a Western nation on earth that's got the vaccination rates as high as we have. On a state level, the frustrations and the border closures and the bureaucracy that's gone with the crisis has been, in my view, extremely frustrating. But again, you can only look to the future, and we will have to learn to live with the virus. And I think the closures and the stoppages and the freedom, the lack of freedom of movement, which had been taken for granted for so long, is something that we're really going to appreciate when we can move freely again.
On the economic front, how would you assess Australia's relative economic position as opposed to, or as in contrast to, our Asia-Pacific peers, and where do you see the opportunities for growth in the years ahead?
Look, our economy, I think, has been remarkably robust. As I said before, there's some sectors that have been smashed, but I think the future growth opportunities, certainly in the tech space and being smarter about what we do, and in terms of the environment, generating solar, the whole environmental piece is an enormous untapped potential. And I think if you just look at what Ross Garnaut and others are doing and writing about vigorously now, there is going to be huge upside for us. Certainly the world's not going to tire of iron ore anytime soon. So they will, as they have done in the last 12 months, be very strong export earners for the country. There will be a big demand for property, good property. You're seeing lots of huge demand in regional areas, anything between 2 and 3 hours from a capital city. You just have to look at the median price changes. It's been enormously strong. People want to live near a city, but also have the benefits of a region. Sea changes, tree changes, and the like.
We'll get into your property background a little bit later on, but I do want to ask you, can you quite believe the capital growth figures that you've seen, be it in Melbourne or Sydney, in terms of house prices recently?
Look, it's a sport in Sydney. In fact, if you were looking for properties, as we flirted with for a couple of weeks in Sydney, I think by the time we changed our minds, it had probably gone up 4 or 5%. I don't think that's sustainable forever in the long term. I mean, 20s and 30% growth across each year is not sustainable, but it just shows you that great property, never goes away, and location is always going to appeal to, astute buyers.
Now, before we move on, I'd be interested to get an understanding of what you've been working on over the past 3 or 4 years. What's keeping you busy at the moment?
Look, I have a diverse portfolio of directorships, not-for-profit and for-purpose interests. I'm less active in the property space than I was a decade ago, deliberately so. But I do enjoy my not-for-profit boards. They probably occupy a third of my any given week. And they include the Arts Centre Melbourne. I chair their foundation, and I was on their trust for 3 years. The Malthouse Theatre, I'm an active director there and a donor, and Documentary Australia, where I'm deputy chair and have been on the board there for 3 or 4 years. And then I chair the Sydney Myer Fund, which is one of the two sort of philanthropic mastheads of the family, the other being the Myer Foundation. And I've been on that board for quite some time. Those activities give me a great deal of pleasure and joy, and I mix them with commercial interests, directorships. I'm a director of the larger Myer Family Investment, which is fast approaching its centenary. So there's enough to keep me busy, Rob.
Just on the topic of sort of arts and when you're reflecting on the past 18 months, to what degree have things like museums and art galleries here in Victoria been smashed, and what sort of work's going on in the background to try and get those institutions to recover to where they were?
Well, look, speaking with my Malthouse and Arts Centre Melbourne directorships, they've had a really, really difficult time. And we had a meeting for the Arts Centre Melbourne Foundation last night. We had a presentation that's going to detail the reopening plan for the Arts Centre Melbourne. And that's exciting, getting audiences back on the stage, particularly starting with the Sydney Myer Music Bowl over the summer series. And then, the resident companies coming back into the main auditoria during next year. They're excited about that, but it's almost as if the technicians and behind the house, back of house and front of house, really need to relearn their craft and their jobs because they've been off tools for so long. The Malthouse is obviously a smaller example. We are looking forward to getting audiences back outside initially. The Malthouse outdoor stage, which Sydney Myer Fund and the state government and others put together last year to address sort of COVID needs and expanding the offer for the Malthouse. That's going to be one of the drivers that brings new audiences into the theatre. But they're just looking forward to putting on shows with some sort of certainty around government health protocols.
I want to ask about your background. As I understand it, you attended Scotch Grammar, I think, in terms of schooling, and then you also did an MBA later in life at the University of Melbourne. Tell me a little bit about sort of Andrew Myer growing up and some of your best memories.
Look, there are many. I did attend Scotch College, which a lot of my brothers did. My father went to Geelong Grammar, and he was keen not to repeat that experience. Although my children, my daughter particularly, went to Timbertop and had a terrific time during that. Victorian life was different in the 60s and 70s. It was an entirely different place. I have many happy memories of growing up in Toorak with colleagues, spending time at the South Coast camping with my family. My father and Roy Grounds, the architect of the Arts Centre, had a property on the South Coast there. So we had most summers there for 5 or 7 years.
Now, one of the things that I did want to ask you about, Andrew, was that I read that you ended up in Hollywood sometime in the mid-1990s to work in film production. Tell me a little bit about how that came about.
Look, an interesting part of my life. I'd finished a management course at Monash and had always expressed interest in the film business. And through an introduction, a family friend introduced me to Robert Kirby at Village Roadshow, who introduced me to Greg Coote, who was running the LA office. And I became a sort of a film wannabe, packed my bags with my wife, or then partner, and we went to LA, which was an extraordinary time. We were working in the Avenue of the Stars, attending workshop screenings, reading a lot of scripts, going to movie launches, driving around Hollywood. It was a little bit quieter than it is now, but really it was a sort of a baptism of fire and ignited my interest.
And what was it like during that period, say 1990s, mid to late 1990s, living in LA? How long were you there?
Look, I was there a short time. I was only under a year, but it really galvanised my interest in the film business. And subsequent to that experience, I came back and got involved with the Australian Film, Television and Radio School in Sydney as a council member, and developed my long-standing relationship with people like Rob Connolly, the director, and set up a film company with a great colleague, Ned Lander. And we made a couple of films together. including Radiance, which was Rachel Perkins' first feature film, and that launched the career of many in their lifetimes. Warwick Thornton, who won a Palme d'Or amongst other things. Deborah Mailman, who would be known to the viewers. So it was a good class, the class of '97 on that film, and we were very fortunate to have a retrospective screening just recently at the Sydney Film Festival. The National Archive each year restores 20 films, and ours was one of them. So we had a beautiful new digital print, and it was very emotional, I have to say. I was quite teary at the end of the experience, and thank the curator from the National Archive, because it's a wonderful moment to get that sort of work in a state where it can't decay.
And what do you like about, what attracted you to film production? What do you like about movies and films and that industry?
Look, my career's really been one of sort of creativity and concrete, the nice juxtapositions. But I love working on a project, and whether it's physical property or intellectual property, the notion of taking something and running with it and improving it and enhancing it and making it and then selling it, it's a sort of a natural lifestyle, a cycle I should say, natural life cycle.
Let's talk about the concrete aspect of your life, in particular through AV Myers Group and some of the developments that you've done. As I understand it, you got involved in property development around about 2002, 2003 with a development that you did alongside Rob Mills. Tell me about what attracted you to becoming a developer.
Look, as I said, the nature of a project I find exciting, and working with talented people on a design that's going to fulfil a client's needs. I was keen to sort of broaden my wings in terms of business experience. I'd been in hospitality for 5 or 6 years prior to that. The film business was sort of fledgling, and property was an obvious fit for me. So I was fortunate enough to sort of do a mentorship with Don Musto, who'd been around the property block for 20 or 30 years before I arrived. And he sort of took me under his wing, and we did that project and subsequent other projects together with a few other partners, and it was a great success. I think if you can point to projects where you don't end up in court or disputing the original agreements, they remain in the bottom drawer, you're doing pretty well.
And you did do, it must be said, some pretty sort of large projects, some pretty iconic projects, in particular the Fawkner Apartments. You also did the Well at Camberwell. You did the Roy Apartments in Fitzroy and 9 to 11 Claremont Street. Out of all of those projects, when you look back now, what were the fundamentals that you considered or analysed prior to either acquiring the site or actually completing the development?
Look, Rob, as most of your interviewees would tell you, the great thing about property is you normally make your profit on the way in. It's getting the right land at close to the right price. That's becoming more difficult as competition has increased. And it's having a marketing concept or a design such that it's going to resonate with the consumers that you're trying to attract as buyers. They're probably the two key drivers. Obviously, you've got to have an experienced project manager and builder. They just go part and parcel. And be open to construction innovations as and when they come along. Now, since I started even 20 years ago, the construction techniques and the technologies and the sustainability piece that goes into these buildings now is radically different when you consider that you basically got timber multi-storey office towers now. Extraordinary.
So you did quite a few projects between that period, say 2002 and 2012. What made you step away? Was it just a timing aspect, or were you just your interest was moving elsewhere?
Look, like I've found a lot in life, my interest does tend to move elsewhere over time. I'd exited the Well at Camberwell, which we'd developed and retained. We developed that and released it largely in the last 2 years of my ownership, to the point where we found an attractive buyer and moved on. And I reallocated my portfolio to take on more of a slightly detuned in terms of the risk profile.
There's also been a number of investments that you've made through the AV Myers Group in terms of equities, both domestic and international. What are you seeing in the market volatility that's occurred over the past 2 years? Are there any particular industries or sectors that stand out to you from an investment perspective?
Look, probably let's start with something that I wouldn't touch, which is crypto. That's a volatile ride, but look, if that's your thing, good luck. I think investment, we're coming up to a centenary of our family investment vehicle, which essentially went from a single stock in Myer, the then Myer business, to Coles Myer. We have a fully diversified portfolio globally now, of which I'm a director of that company. We've got an extremely talented CEO, John Russell, who works with our family for the past 5 years. You've got to accept and embrace volatility if you're in equities or private equity or ventures. That is part and parcel of being in that space. But as Buffett said, if you're not prepared to look at your portfolio decrease by 50% in a downturn, you shouldn't be doing it. That's not to say that patient, clever investors have cranked out reliable double-digit returns for decades. And that's our sort of mantra probably for the family investment vehicle.
Before we move on, you're quite modest when you are talking about some of the films that you did produce. I mean, as you said, there was Radiance, but there was also household movies such as Look Both Ways and Romulus, My Father as well. When you look back at the 9, I think, feature films that you produced, is there one that really stands out to you as being, the one you're most proudest of? Look,
it's often your first. And in this case for me was Radiance with Rachel Perkins. It was a seminal film for her and the Indigenous filmmakers, and subsequent to her really sort of staking the claim in terms of it was the first Indigenous film to do any serious box office. Whilst it was only about $500,000, the previous iteration had done sort of 50,000. And it also set the way for, and Rachel herself described it at the time, was the first blackfella film with jokes. And it was a dark satire that appealed to the audiences, and it was very popular both at the Melbourne Film Festival and Sydney. It won the audience poll in both cases. Probably more recently, I think in terms of quality of filmmaking, Rob Connolly, who I've worked with on numerous occasions, his next film, Blueback, is going to be an extraordinarily beautiful film, and that will be in cinemas next June. Because of the nature of the story, the performances of these young actors, and the context of where it's shot and how it's shot will be something. You also mentioned some of your philanthropic endeavours that you've been involved in, and there's been quite a lot: Arts Centre Melbourne, Bush Heritage Melbourne, Berry Street, the Smith family and so forth. Why is philanthropy so important to you and your family? Look, philanthropy is sort of in the Myer family DNA. Sidney Myer, when he died, left 10% of his estate, which was £1 million at the time, 1934, to his executives to set up the fund, Sidney Myer Fund. And I think that single act really galvanised the family, particularly my father and uncle, to subsequently set up the Myer Foundation in the late 50s. So we've observed and participated in philanthropic sort of intent and endeavour for 50, 70 years. So when you do something a lot, you become pretty good at it, and it's something that we're deeply proud of. I actually was in a Sidney Myer Fund meeting last week, and we'd like to do a cumulative number in terms of total grants, and it's circa 255 million, not expressed in current day dollars, so it'd be a lot more in current day dollars. That's a number that our family's deeply proud of, because you get to have impact in the community over decades. And I also want to ask you about the Myer family company, which, as I mentioned, you were on the board of alongside a number of high-profile people, both within the family and external to the family. What is it that business does today that it focuses on mostly? Look, it has a diverse portfolio of equities, international equities, Asian equities, private equity, listed investments. And we've transitioned really, as I said, prior from a single stock, single focus entity with an operating family members in an operating business to a diversified investment portfolio. And to date, we're happy with its performance.
I want to ask you, when you reflect on your career, you've been in business for 34 or 35 years now, what are the best pieces of advice that you can share, or some of the best lessons that you've learnt along the way?
I think values, starting with a value set, gives you a framework in which to confront most of life's challenges. Adjacent to that, you've got to have a sense of self-belief that you are capable of doing the things that you set out to achieve. And surround yourself with intelligent people and creative people. I've certainly come to know that there are far more intelligent and far more creative people than I, but part of the joy in life is actually working closely with those sort of people, because you can undertake endeavours and projects that otherwise on your own set you wouldn't contemplate. And that is deeply rewarding. And be prepared to adapt. I think certain people, if they pursue a dedicated career in the law or in medicine, or that's their shtick, that's fine. I've tended to take a view that life's finite. You've got a certain number of decades, if you're lucky, to make a mark, and prepared to take new directions and adapt as things change around you.
When you reflect on the Myer family, what has made it so successful, and what's the glue that's kept it together? Because it's quite rare for a family of, you know, this significance and scale to last so long and be able to stick together so well.
Look, we often describe the key elements of the family, the Myer family's glue, is philanthropy and family. So acknowledging others through the work that we do in the philanthropic space, and recognising that there are talents and endeavours from individual family members, and they will bring those efforts to bear at certain times in the family's history. We've been very fortunate to again work with dedicated, very loyal advisors over a long period of time, and have over time taken a reasonably conservative approach to investing. We've been fortunate with the Australian tax structure. My uncle often jokes that the CGT changes in '85 and franking credits were the second best, other than compounding interest assets that we received as a family for investment.
And just to close out our discussion, what's next for Andrew Myer, the person? What do you want your legacy to be, and how are you going to spend your years ahead?
Look, I have a personal mantra that what I bring to projects and enterprise and not-for-profit is to create some positive impact. And whether that's a large or a small amount of impact, depends on the amount of application that I make myself. But I, again, will continue with a diverse portfolio of interests. I look forward deeply to continuing to contribute to the larger family investment vehicle. It's a fantastic entity, one that I'm proud of, and also continuing in the philanthropic space with the Sydney Myer Fund and other endeavours that I pursue.
Andrew Myer AM, pleasure having you as a guest on our series. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Rob. It's been a pleasure.